This is part 2 of 3. Remember that Impossible VHS will return in July, along with the other shows this week. Maybe a little late. Recap. The first part ended with a child asleep in a green chair, holding her friend with a wound that would not close. This part begins with a train that leaves at 7 in the morning, early, so that no one will see it go. We notice. Stories from the Theatre of Dreams. Season 0, Episode 3. The Disillusionment of Spicy Friends. Part 2 of 3. Tonight's performance, The Friendship Bureau, Dream Log number 003-412 AM. Written and directed by Morgan Olson. The Remedial Train. The train left platform 9 at 7 in the morning, which Wexley thought was either very thoughtful or very cruel, and she had decided by the time she boarded that it was both at once, and that this was simply how the Bureau did everything. Thoughtful because the early hour meant the platforms were empty. No commuters to stare, no children to point. Cruel, for exactly the same reason. There was no crowd to hide in, nothing to look at, but the grey light coming up slow over the tracks and the orderly line of adults in their borrowed dressing gowns being walked 2 by 2 toward the narrow door of car 4. A thing done early so no one would see it. Which told you, if you were paying attention, that someone had once decided it was a thing worth not being seen. Car 4 was not like the other cars. The other cars had seats that faced forward, and windows that opened, and a little fold-down tray where a person could set down a cup of tea and feel for the length of a journey, like a person going somewhere of their own accord. Car 4 had none of these. It had a long padded floor the color of old mustard, and along each wall a row of ankle cuffs bolted at intervals of 2 feet, and above each cuff, stenciled in the Bureau's regulation typeface, inversion required. Hold your pillow, breathe. Wexley stood at the door with her clipboard and called the names and tried to call them gently, which the clipboard did not make easy. Marsh, Della. Here, said Della Marsh in the voice that had been on every poster in the city, and stepped forward, and did not look at Wexley and did not look at the car, but lifted her chin and looked instead at a point far down the platform where the tracks curved away into the last of the dark, as though somewhere out along that line there was a thing she could not yet see but had already decided to meet on her feet. It was the posture of a woman walking on stage. She had nowhere left to perform but here, and so she performed her own composure, for an audience of one 11-year-old with a clipboard, and Wexley understood with a small turn of the heart that the dignity was the last possession she had been allowed to keep through the gate. Wexley made a tick. Car 4, berth 7. The attendant will help you with the cuffs. Della Marsh said nothing and walked through the door, and the green gown went after her like the tail of something leaving. There were 9 of them that morning. Wexley called all 9 names, made all 9 ticks, then climbed up into the car and found the small folding seat at the far end, set aside for the escorting officer, and sat and watched the attendant go down the row. The attendant was a boy of about 10 named Horatio. He was very good at his job. You could see in the careful way he handled each cuff that he had decided some time ago that if the thing had to be done, then it would be done kindly. And you could see, in the way he never once met an adult's eyes, exactly what that kindness was costing him. The inversion was not violent. It never looked the way people imagined from the outside. The cuffs went on. The boy cranked a small brass lever at the foot of each berth, and slowly, smoothly, with a sound like a held breath letting go, each adult tilted backward until they lay face up with their feet raised and their heads hung gently below the level of their hearts and their friendships. The grey ones, the wounded ones, the ones shriveled to the size of a closed fist, settled onto their chests to be held. Nobody at the bureau could have told you why it worked on the rare occasions it did. That was the thing the manuals tucked away behind all their confident taxonomy. They did not know the mechanism, and never had. The inversion was not theirs to begin with. It came from far back, from before there was a bureau to write anything down. From the old book that every child in the city still had read to them, with its worn cover and its pictures of the early world, and from the little rhyme that lived inside it, that when a friendship has turned downcast, you do not coax the friendship, you turn the whole person over, so the droop runs the other way, and the mouth that had bent toward a frown hangs, for a while, right side up. Twist the sorrow over, the rhyme said, and now and again the sorrow forgets itself. And every so often. Not often, but often enough that the saying had outlived 1,000 years of people testing it. A friendship that everyone had written off, a grey, shriveled, ruined thing, would hang upside down long enough and simply, quietly bloom back to full health. No one could say why that one and not the rest. No one had ever made it happen on purpose. The whole vast apparatus of the camp was built around a folk miracle it could schedule but could not cause. And here was the thing Wexley had not been ready for the first time, and was not ready for now, on her 5th. There is no dignified way to lie upside down. There is no version of it a person can perform their way out of. Della Marsh, who could hold 1,000 seats in the palm of her voice, lay in berth 7 with her feet in the air and her gown fallen back and her famous face gone slack with the blood of it. And she was not a soprano anymore, and not a citizen, and not anyone's idea of anything except a tired woman holding the grey ruin of a friendship to her chest in a moving box that smelled of mustard and machine oil. The train pulled out of platform 9, and the city slid backward past the windows. And one by one, because the inversion made them drowsy whether they wished it or not, the adults of car 4 began to weep without making any sound at all. Not from pain. The drain did not hurt. They wept the way people weep when they are finally completely held still, and there is nothing left to do but feel the size of what has happened to them. This was the part of the job, Wexley thought, they really should tell you about at 7. Della Marsh was in berth 7, directly across the aisle from the officer's folding seat. This had not been Wexley's choice. It was simply where the alphabet had put her, and Wexley had resolved on the platform to be professional about it, to watch the car the way an officer was supposed to, for distress, for a pillow going into crisis. And to say as little as possible, and to arrive at the camp in 3 hours, having done her job and not one thing more. She lasted 40 minutes. Most of them closed their eyes, eventually. 6 of the 9 were asleep before the first tunnel. But Della Marsh lay in berth 7 with her eyes open and fixed on the ceiling, and Wexley recognized the look, because it was the same one she had worn on the stage in the half-second before her pillow burst. The look of a person staring very hard at one fixed point because they have understood that if they stop, even briefly, the staring will turn into something they cannot take back. "It doesn't hurt," Wexley said, before she had decided to speak. "The drain, in case you were wondering." The eyes moved to her without the rest of the face moving at all. I wasn't. Most people assume it does. It doesn't. It's more like... She reached for it. Like standing up too fast, a pressure, and then it goes. A silence. The train swayed. then to the ceiling. "How old are you?" 11. 11? The word landed differently in her mouth than it had in the destroyer's. He had said it with sadness, the way you say it about something already lost. She said it the way you test the depth of cold water with 1 foot. "And you've carried people up here before?" 4 times, riding it, never, obviously. Delamarche almost smiled, and it was worse than if she hadn't. "No, not obviously. Nothing about you is obvious. That's rather the trouble with you." She turned her head with effort, the inversion making it a small act of will, and looked at Wexley directly. Was it good, being 7, signing the book? Wexley considered lying and found she didn't want to. Yes. What did it feel like? Like the most important thing I'd ever done. She looked at her hands in her lap. It still does. Mostly. The soprano let that mostly sit in the air between them, the way she would have let a held note decay in a hall, and Wexley felt it expose her, that one small, honest word. "I was 7 once," Delamarche said. "I signed something too, a conservatory form. The head of admissions told my mother I had a gift, and my mother cried in the corridor where she thought I couldn't see her." The grey nothing on her chest rose and fell. "It turns out a gift and a friendship are kept in different places. You can polish the one for 30 years and never once open the drawer where you put the other." She paused, and when she went on, her voice had changed. Had stopped performing, had gone quiet and plain and terrible in its plainness. "I want you to understand something, because I think you are the only person who is going to listen to me say it before I am made to forget I ever knew it. I was not cruel. I keep waiting to find the cruelty the moment I can point to the door I slammed. And there isn't one. That's the thing nobody warns you about. There was no villain. There was only a great deal of applause, and a very full calendar, and a friend who wrote, the first year often, and then less, and then on my birthday, and then..." She stopped. "And the awful part, the part I cannot get past, is that I was happy. I thought it was going well. I thought, look how full my life is. You don't notice a thing draining when there's so much pouring in to cover the sound of it." The train went into a tunnel. The car dropped into darkness, 30 seconds of it. And in the dark, Wexley heard the soprano breathing carefully, evenly, a singer's discipline turned now to the simple task of not coming apart. When the light came back, Delamarche was looking at the ceiling again. Her composure returned, and Wexley found she hated the composure now, because she knew what it was holding up. "You caught the man who did it," Delamarche said. "That's your job. The ones he hit on the way. That's a cost of the job. That's what you told yourself, isn't it, coming down from the gallery? The mission had acceptable losses, and I was one of them." The accuracy of it landed somewhere behind Wexley's sternum, exact and cold. And she opened her mouth to say, "That's not how I'm not angry," Delamarche said gently before she could. "I'm a woman who has read rooms for a living for 30 years, and I am telling you what I see, because you are 11, and someone ought to. You are already very good at the acceptable losses arithmetic. You did it in half a second on a balcony in the dark, and you got the sum right, and you will get it right 1,000 more times. And one day, the sum is going to come out to a number you cannot live with. And on that day, I would like you to remember that you came down those stairs 3 at a time, shouting before you had finished the arithmetic. That wasn't protocol." She closed her eyes at last. That was a child who saw something she could not make acceptable and could not stop herself from trying to stop it. Don't let them train that out of you. It's the only part of this whole machine worth keeping. Wexley did not answer. She had been taught not to prompt at moments like this, and anyway she had nothing at all, that would have been true, and also bearable to say. And it was then that she felt it. Her pillow, which had been sitting at her feet in the regulation officer's position, plump and well and quiet, had moved without her noticing. It had crossed the small space of the folding seat and pressed itself against the side of her left ankle, the way it did at home in the night when she had a fever, or the way it had done the week her grandmother stopped knowing her name. It pressed there, warm and certain, and Wexley understood that her pillow had felt something her face had not yet admitted to feeling. She did not move it back. She reached down instead after a moment and laid 2 fingers against it, lightly, where no one in the car could see. And across the aisle, eyes still closed, as if she had heard the small adjustment of cloth, Delamarche said, very softly, "Good. Hold on to that one, while you still bounce back. There's going to come a year when you don't." The camp came up out of the countryside at 10:30, and it did not look like what it was. It never did. It looked like a large, serious, well-proportioned house built by people in a previous century who had believed in good drainage and the moral value of symmetry. Long, low buildings of pale stone, a courtyard with a working fountain, and then the thing you saw first, always, from the bend in the approach road before the gate or the wall or anything else, the washing lines. Rows and rows of them, strung between the outbuildings, and on them the pillows, hung out to dry after their first cleaning. Dozens. In every shade of grey and almost grey and grey, going back toward colour, they turned and lifted and settled in the morning wind. Dozens of small, tired flags belonging to no country, drying in the sun so they might be carried back that night to the chests of the people learning slowly how to hold them again. Wexley looked at the washing lines as she had 4 times before and felt the particular ache of the place, which was not despair. The camp was not a place of despair. That was the thing visitors never understood, but something far harder to carry, which was hope at its most patient and least certain. The hope that a thing scrubbed gently enough, often enough, by hands that had finally learned to be slow, might come most of the way back. Most of the way. The lines were full of most of the way. The camp was what you got when an institution took a thing an old book promised and tried to make it a public service. A ruined adult could not simply be left at home to hope. A destroyed friendship walking loose was treated as a danger to the whole street, the way an untreated fever is. And the city had decided, somewhere back in its history, that the folk cure was too important and far too unreliable to leave to chance. So they built this. The basins, the inversion racks, the washing lines, the shifts, the pale stone and the good drainage, and the moral value of symmetry. A sanitarium for the one friend a person had. It was not cruel exactly. It was methodical and compulsory, and faintly grim in the way of every place that has industrialized a tenderness. They inverted people now in rows, on a schedule, the way the old book had said to do it to one person at a time with your own 2 hands. And they got, reliably, most of the way. The full rebloom, the thing the rhyme actually promised, still came only when it came, to whom it chose, for reasons the cleanest sanitarium in the world had never once managed to write down. The superintendent met them at the gate. Her name was Elspeth, and she was 14, which made her ancient, and she wore the grey flannel the way the truly old ones did. As though she had forgotten she had it on, a pen behind each ear, the face of someone who had heard every possible thing a new arrival could say, and had made a long, considered, costly peace with all of it. 9 this morning, she said, not a question. 9, one priority. Wexley handed over the file without looking at Delamarche, who stood very correctly at the end of the line, performing her composure for the last few yards. She would be permitted to keep it. The soprano, total loss on the night, everything else secondary. Elspeth flicked through, stopped at Delamarche's page, and then did the thing that marked her out. She looked up and looked at the woman, not the way an administrator looks at an intake, but the way someone looks who has spent years learning to see past the gown and the chin and the famous wreckage of a face. "You're going to be difficult," she said, and there was no unkindness in it at all. There was something almost like respect. "Almost certainly," Delamarche agreed. "Good. It's the ones who come in easy that break my heart. They've usually given up the fight before the gate." She handed the file to an assistant. "Basin room B. Give her the corner berth. Better light, and she'll want something to look at." To Wexley lower. "You're staying for the handover? And the debrief, then the 4 o'clock back. Tea at 2. She studied Wexley a moment with the private arithmetic the senior ones always did, the one involving her age and her stillness, arriving as always at a result they couldn't file. "You look tired, Plum." "I'm fine." "You look tired," Elspeth said again, and let it go, and turned, and the 9 filed in after her through the gate. Delamarche went last, and at the last moment, in the gateway, with the washing lines lifting and falling behind the wall, she turned and looked back at the 11-year-old standing alone on the road, and her face did several things at once and settled on none of them. And she said, "The child, the one with the violin, you're going back for her?" "Yes." "Good." She held the look 1 second longer than was comfortable. "Notice everything," she said. "Don't make it acceptable." And then the gate took her and closed, and Wexley stood on the road with her pillow pressed to her ankle and the 4 o'clock train very far away, and watched a green gown disappear among people learning, slowly, to wash the grey out of the only thing that had ever mattered. While Wexley was on the train, Beatrix had been busy because that was the shape the 3 of them made. Wexley ran toward things. Beatrix mapped them. Old Pym did the part in the middle that required someone willing to go face down over a pit rail on a moment's notice. 14 cases in 4 years, a record for a cell their size, acknowledged once a year by the review board with a nod that meant both well done and do it again. They always did it again. Beatrix had started with the wound. She had taken Cordelia and her pillow up to the medical rooms on the 4th floor, where the walls were painted the particular green someone had once decided was calming, and that Beatrix privately found the least calming color she had ever stood inside of. And she had sat with the child while the bureau's physician examined the wound with a glass and a very fine probe and said nothing for a long time. His name was Fen. He was 12. He had the stillness of a person who has found the one thing he was made for and is afraid, every day, of not being equal to it. Cordelia had fallen asleep in the green chair before he finished. 8 years old, her hair still pinned up for a performance that felt now like it had happened in another year, and she slept the heavy, graceless sleep of a child who has cried herself out, holding her wounded pillow against her chest, the way you might hold a bird you have found on the pavement and cannot bring yourself to put down. The pillow's thin grey cut faced up, not closing. Beatrix looked at it for a while and felt an anger arrive in her that did not burn, that never burned in Beatrix. That was the frightening thing about her anger, but filed itself away, neat and cold and permanent, and settled in to wait. "Well," she said finally, quiet so as not to wake the child. "It's not his," Fen said. He was still bent over the glass. "The destroyer's. Whatever he did in that hall made everything worse. The way a flood makes everything wet. But this cut was already here before he played his note. An hour before, maybe more." He sat back and took the glass from his eye and looked at her over the top of it, and she watched him decide whether to say the rest, and decide that he had to. Someone was in that hall before the performance. Someone cut this one child's pillow on purpose, with something we've never seen. And they did it knowing the destroyer was coming, so that when he turned the whole room to chaos, no one would be looking at a single girl in the choir. He paused. And it isn't healing, B. Children always heal. It isn't healing because it was never meant to. Beatrix looked at the sleeping child. There's a way to do that, she said. It was not quite a question. To wound a child's pillow so it stays wounded. There's one way. Fen put the glass in his pocket, and his hands were not quite steady. We don't publish it. We don't teach it. It exists in a single document, in the sealed archive on the 8th floor, as the record of the only time it was ever done. 30 years ago, before the Bureau was what it is now. He stood and straightened his coat, as if the gesture could straighten the rest of it. Somebody read that document, B. Somebody walked up to the 8th floor and asked to read about the worst thing a person can do to a child, and then went and did it. He looked at the girl. You need the list of everyone who's been granted a reader's pass. How many? 17 in the last 10 years. I'll have the names by this afternoon. He hesitated. B, most of them will be ours. The 8th floor isn't open to strangers. Whoever did this, we know them. They've sat in our meetings. They've signed our files. Beatrix stood and looked down at Cordelia a moment longer and reached out and very gently tucked the child's grey ruined pillow more securely into the crook of her sleeping arm so it would not fall, and said in the cold, neat voice that meant the anger had finished filing itself and was ready, "Get me the list." The 4 o'clock from the camp pulled into platform 9 at 7:10, into the blue dark of the city in early evening, and Beatrix was on the platform waiting with 2 cups of tea and the face she wore when something had broken open in a direction no one had braced for. Wexley took a cup. The warmth of it surprised her. She had not noticed until then how cold the train had left her. "Tell me," Beatrix told her, in order, without ornament, the way she told everything. The examination, the cut that came an hour too early, the sealed archive, the one technique that was never written into any manual, the 17 passes, most of them will be ours. She laid it down piece by piece, and then, as she always did, stopped and left the space at the end empty and waited. Because Beatrix's gift was that she trusted Wexley to see the shape the pieces made, and Wexley's gift was that she always did. And tonight she wished, walking up the cold platform with the tea going lukewarm in her hand, that just this once she didn't. There was one more piece, which Beatrix set down last and lightest, because it had come back from records only that afternoon, and seemed, in the shape of the night, to be nothing but a cruelty with no use. The man they had caught, the destroyer, had once been theirs. Bureau, Juvenile Division, a child agent who had carried the badge and aged out of it 30 years gone. Beatrix said it the way you mention a coincidence you have not yet found a use for, and Wexley filed it the same way, and neither of them, walking up the cold, wet platform, set it down next to anything else. She saw it on the first half block. Someone knew what the destroyer would do. Someone sent the tip, so we would be there to catch him. So catching him would be the largest thing in the room. While we were the audience to one ruin, they performed another, on a child, in the dark at the edge of the stage. She thought of Della Marsh, inverted, saying the destroyer was the question. She had been more right than she knew. The tip, Wexley said. Whoever sent it wanted us in that hall, wanted us looking at the orchestra, because while every eye we had was on the third chair, no eye was on the choir, Beatrix said. They walked half a block in silence. The lamps were coming on above them, throwing their long orange pools across the wet pavement, and in the lit windows on both sides of the street, The adults of the city were arriving home from their days, taking off their coats, setting down their bags, and greeting their pillows, each of them with the small unconscious relief of a person who has not thought about a thing all day and finds, turning at the door, that it is still there, still soft, still waiting. Wexley watched them through the glass and felt something she had no word for. She had spent 4 years protecting that exact moment, that turning at the door, that still there, for 800,000 people who would never know her name. She had believed, without ever once examining the belief, that the Bureau existed to protect it too. 17 names, she said. 17 names. Beatrix drew a folded paper from inside her waistcoat and held it out, and did not let go of it for a half-second longer than necessary, which from Beatrix was the loudest possible warning. Wexley took it, did not open it, held it and looked at the lamplight on the pavement and the lit windows and the people in them turning at their doors, and felt the size of the thing they were standing at the lip of, and felt her pillow at her ankle, warm and close and quietly breathing, the same pillow that had pressed against her on the train before her face knew why. She thought of Della Marsh. Notice everything. Don't make it acceptable. She thought of the destroyer's sad, fond smile. She thought of an 8-year-old asleep in a green chair holding a wound that would not close because someone who had sat in their meetings, someone who had signed their files, had read a document about the worst thing a person can do to a child and decided to do it. She opened the paper. She read down the 17 names, and she stopped walking. Beatrix stopped beside her. "You see it," she said. Not a question. "Name 12. "Name 12, Beatrix said. Name 12 was not a stranger, not an outsider who had talked his way onto the 8th floor. Name 12 was someone who came to the Bureau every Thursday afternoon and sat at the long table in the 3rd floor meeting room and read the juvenile division's files and signed off on their operations, and who told them, once a year at the review board, with a nod that meant well done and do it again in equal measure, that they were doing fine work, the most important work in the city. Name 12 was the person who had sent them to the cantata. Wexley stood very still under the lamp. She was 11 years old. She had carried the Bureau's badge inside her lapel since she was 7. 2 hands not quite touching, we notice. And she had believed in it the way you believe in the floor. Without thought, certain it would hold. And now she stood on a wet street in the blue dark and read a name and felt the floor become a question, felt the whole upside-down world she had given her short life to tilt very slightly, the way the audience had tilted toward the stage. And for the first time since she had signed her name in the big book and felt the most important feeling she had ever had, Wexley Plum did not know who she had been protecting that moment at the door for, or from whom. Her pillow pressed against her ankle, hard now, the way it had on the train, the way it had the week her grandmother forgot her name. She reached down and pressed back, and held it, and let herself feel the size of it for exactly as long as she could afford to, which was not very long. Then she folded the paper along its old crease and put it in her breast pocket, behind the badge. And when she spoke, her voice came out level, which she was more grateful for than she would ever say. "Right," she said. "We need old Pim. He's at the office. Been there since this morning." A pause. "He found something else." Of course he did. Wexley started walking again, faster now, into the lit and ordinary and entirely unsuspecting city, with the name behind her badge and the cold tea in her hand and the anger of a quiet girl walking beside her. "Tell me on the way." And the city went on around them, lamp-lit and full of small, invisible friendships going about their quiet business. 800,000 turnings at the door, And somewhere on the 8th floor, a sealed archive sat in the dark with 16 other names still in it. And somewhere across the city, a man went about his Thursday evening greeting his own pillow at his own door, not yet knowing that an 11-year-old had written his name in a notebook, sharpened at both ends, and meant to keep her promise to a sleeping child, whatever it cost and however high the sum. We notice.
That was part 2 of The Disillusionment of Spicy Friends. An 11-year-old has a name folded behind her badge now, and a promise she made to a sleeping child, and 3 hours on a cold train to think about the difference between a cost and a crime. Part 3, next Sunday. This has been the Theater of Dreams from Static Oracle Press. The curtains stay open. We notice.